And here we can now actually do something interesting. But before we do that, let's simply connect the provider to this widget as we did it before for the other providers. So when we initialize our filters, we no longer have to do this with help of the current filters that are received here. Instead, we can get rid of this here in our filters screen, because now we can get this information from the provider instead. So therefore here in its state, we can use ref and then call read. And here I'm using read instead of watch because init state is only executed once anyways. So setting up a listener here doesn't make too much sense because this code won't run again anyways, unless the widget was removed and re-added. So here I will read, and I will read the filters provider. And from that filters provider, by using read here, I'll get my active filters as they are stored in the provider or in my notifier. I'll get my map here. And we can then, of course, use that to access the gluten-free filter. And the same for the other filters for lactose-free, vegetarian, and vegan. We can use this data from the provider to initialize our local state in this widget. And I do have this local state here because I of course still want to make sure that as users tap these different list tiles, these different switches in the list tiles, I do reflect those changes on the screen. That's why I'm still managing this state locally in this widget as well, so that these updates to the UI as users tap those switches are still performed. But I initialize my switches here, or my filters, based on the data stored in the provider, and I of course want to update the data stored in the provider as I leave this screen. So therefore here in this onWillPop function here, I now want to reach out to my provider by using ref here. And here, since we're in an event handler, we should also use read instead of watch, as mentioned before. And here I also read my filters provider, but in this case, actually filters provider.notifier to get direct access to this state notifier class, because it's that class that has the set filter method. And here I now want to set my filter, but which one? Well, here, when the user taps the back button, I actually want to set all my filters. So therefore, indeed, we should go back to filters provider and maybe add a second method, set filters, which sets all the filters, where I simply expect to get my map of filter bool mappings, which could be called chosen filters. And then I simply set my state to those chosen filters. So I expect to get a map of filter settings, and I then use this new map to override my existing state. With this method added here, we can go back to filters Dart, and here we can now call set filters, and now pass our map of updated filters to this method. So this map here, instead of passing it to pop, we pass it to set filters to update our filters in the provider. With that, we also don't need to call pop manually anymore. Instead, we can just return true here to allow Flutter to perform the pop action it wanted to perform anyways. And we don't need to do this manually anymore because the only reason we did it manually was so that we could pass some data along. But we're now not doing this anymore because we're using this provider approach instead. Now with that, we are storing these filters as we're leaving this page. But keep in mind that I did now remove this current filters input data, which we previously used to initialize our filters. Now we're doing this on the provider. That's why I removed this property and parameter from the filters screen widget class here. And therefore now in the place where I'm using this class, so in the tabs Dart file, I also have to get rid of this filter data which I wanted to pass to the screen. And we now also can set this to const, and we now also won't get back a result anymore after navigating users to the filters screen, because we're no longer returning any data here. We basically removed this code where we returned data through pop. So therefore here we're no longer getting a result. And of course, therefore here we no longer need to manage the selected filters at all because we're now doing this in the provider. This property here can now be removed. Which of course now also means that we have to do something with this logic here, because we no longer got this selected filters property here. Well, one thing we could do is, of course, we can use ref, which we already have here because the tabs state here already depends on consumer state. And we can watch our filters provider here to get our active filters, because that's exactly what this provider manages. So we can now use this active filters variable here, because there we do have access to the filters, because now we're getting the filter data from the provider. And with that, everything should work again. If we now save this and restart the app, if I go to my filters screen and I set some filters here and then go back, that looks good. Some items are definitely being filtered out, whilst we can still see other meals like this one. So that's how we could implement this filter logic with a provider. But that's not all we can do. Instead, we can leverage this Riverpod package and this provider feature a bit more.